Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the most celebrated figures in history. He was a man who fought for justice, equality, and freedom. His famous "I Have a Dream" speech inspired millions, and his efforts led to major civil rights victories. But behind the speeches, the marches, and the legacy was a man under constant attack, arrested, threatened, and ultimately assassinated. His dream came at a price. So what did it truly cost Martin Luther King Jr. to change the world? And is his dream fully realized today? Martin Luther King Jr. was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, when segregation was the law in the southern United States. Black and white people were forced to live separately. They couldn't eat at the same restaurants, attend the same schools, or even use the same restrooms. From an early age, Martin Luther King Jr. saw the injustices that Black Americans faced. His father was a pastor and civil rights activist, and young Martin grew up in a church that preached faith, equality, and standing up for justice. He was a gifted student, graduating from college at just 19 years old, and later earned a doctorate in theology. While studying, Martin Luther King Jr. was deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of India's fight for independence. Gandhi believed in nonviolent resistance, fighting injustice without using violence.
The whole philosophy of Gandhi and passive nonviolent resistance. And I was so deeply moved by the message that
Martin Luther King Jr. realized this could be a powerful way to fight racism in America, and it became the foundation of his activism. Martin Luther King Jr.'s first major role in the civil rights movement came in 1955 with the Montgomery bus boycott. It all started when Rosa Parks, a Black woman, refused to give up her bus seat to a white man. In response, Black residents of Montgomery, Alabama, refused to ride city buses in protest of segregation. The boycott lasted 381 days, despite threats, arrests, and violence. As a young preacher, Martin Luther King Jr. became the leader of the movement, organizing speeches, meetings, and peaceful protests. The boycott was a huge success. In 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on buses was illegal. This victory proved that nonviolent resistance could create real change. After the bus boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. became the face of the civil rights movement. He traveled the country, giving speeches and organizing protests against racism, segregation, and unfair laws. His message was clear: change could happen, but only through peace, unity, and determination. But as his influence grew, so did the dangers he faced. His rise to leadership also made him a target. By the early 1960s, the civil rights movement had become a nationwide fight for justice. Peaceful protests, marches, and sit-ins were taking place across the country, demanding an end to segregation, discrimination, and racial injustice. One of the biggest turning points came in 1963, a year that tested the movement's strength and Martin Luther King's leadership. In April 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. and his supporters organized protests in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most racist cities in America at the time. Black protesters marched peacefully, but they were met with police violence. Officers used attack dogs, high-pressure fire hoses, and mass arrests to stop the demonstrations. Martin Luther King Jr. was jailed for 8 days, where he wrote his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail, defending peaceful protests. The world watched in shock as images of children being attacked by police dogs and demonstrators being beaten spread in newspapers and on TV. The brutality pushed more people, including politicians, to support civil rights. On August 28, 1963, over 250,000 people from all backgrounds gathered in Washington, D.C. for one of the largest civil rights demonstrations in U.S. history. This was when Martin Luther King delivered his most famous speech.
One day right now in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
He spoke of freedom, equality, and a future where people are judged by their character, not their skin color. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech pushed the government to act. Just months later, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, banning segregation and discrimination. It was one of the greatest victories of the movement. However, not everyone supported Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision. White supremacist groups like the KKK attacked civil rights activists. Some leaders in the U.S. government saw Martin Luther King Jr. as a threat. The FBI began spying on him, trying to discredit him. Even as Martin Luther King Jr. led peaceful protests, the hatred and violence against him grew stronger.
Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
While Martin Luther King Jr. was seen as a hero to millions, the FBI saw him as a threat.
Each of the special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation must be ready and capable to meet any challenge.
Under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI targeted Martin Luther King Jr. in a secret operation designed to discredit, intimidate, and destroy him. Hoover believed that Martin Luther King Jr.'s growing influence could destabilize the status quo. The civil rights movement was changing America, and Hoover saw Martin Luther King Jr. as a dangerous radical who could challenge government power. The FBI accused Martin Luther King Jr. of having ties to communists, which, at the time, was considered a major threat to national security. They also feared that Martin Luther King Jr.'s call for racial and economic justice would lead to mass unrest. The FBI used illegal surveillance tactics to monitor Martin Luther King Jr.'s every move. Wiretaps were placed in his home, office, and even hotel rooms. His phone calls were recorded to gather personal information. FBI agents followed him everywhere, tracking his meetings and speeches. The goal was to find something to ruin his reputation. In 1964, the FBI went even further. Agents sent Martin Luther King Jr. an anonymous letter urging him to take his own life. The letter, which was later revealed in FBI files, tried to humiliate Martin Luther King Jr. by threatening to expose his personal life. But despite the harassment, threats, and constant surveillance, Martin Luther King Jr. refused to be silenced. He continued fighting for justice, expanding his movement beyond civil rights to include economic equality and opposition to the Vietnam War. By 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was more than just a civil rights leader. He was a global figure fighting for the rights of all oppressed people. This made him even more dangerous to those in power. Then, on April 4th, 1968, everything changed. The FBI's war against Martin Luther King Jr. didn't end with threats. It ended with his assassination. But was it just the act of a lone gunman? Or was there more to the story? The truth is more complicated than it seems.
A new Negro came into being with a new determination to suffer, to struggle, to sacrifice, and even to die if necessary in order to be free.
April 4th, 1968, Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King Jr. was standing on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, talking with friends and preparing for another day of protests. Moments later, a single bullet struck him in the neck. He collapsed, bleeding, as people rushed to his side.
I hope and pray that his end would in some way bring people together so that we could solve the many serious problems of human relations that face us in this country of ours today in a nonviolent manner.
At just 39 years old, Martin Luther King Jr. was gone. The news of his assassination shocked the world. Protests and riots erupted in over 100 cities across the United States. People mourned, but they were also angry. Had Martin Luther King Jr. been silenced for standing up against injustice? Authorities quickly identified James Earl Ray, a small-time criminal, as the assassin.
Ray was carrying 2 Canadian passports and a fully loaded pistol when he landed at London from Luton.
He was arrested in London, England, 2 months later. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But shortly after, he took back his confession, saying he had been framed. This raised serious questions. Was Ray really acting alone, or was there something bigger at play? Many people, including Martin Luther King Jr.'s family, questioned the official story. There were several suspicious factors surrounding the case. Ray's sudden confession and later denial made people wonder if he was pressured or set up.
They seek to weaken law enforcement in every conceivable manner.
The FBI had been targeting Martin Luther King Jr. for years, labeling him a threat to national security. Some eyewitnesses reported seeing multiple people involved, not just Ray.
I believe that the FBI had something to do with that conspiracy. It seems to me that surveillance that my husband underwent and the things that have already been revealed that are on record point toward the FBI having certainly known what was happening.
Even Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife, believed her husband's death was part of a larger conspiracy. In 1999, Martin Luther King Jr.'s family pushed for a new investigation. A civil trial was held, and the jury concluded that there was a conspiracy to assassinate MLK. The case suggested that government agencies, including the FBI and military intelligence, may have played a role. However, the U.S. government never officially reopened the investigation. To this day, there is no absolute proof of who was behind Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. Was it a lone gunman or a larger plan to silence a leader fighting for justice? His assassination wasn't just the end of a life. It was the beginning of a lasting legacy. But what did his death truly cost the world? And how much of his dream has been fulfilled? Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, but his dream did not die with him. His fight for justice, equality, and human rights led to some of the most important changes in American history. Thanks to Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement, the U.S. government was forced to act. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a major victory in the fight for racial equality. It made racial segregation illegal, ensuring that Black Americans could no longer be denied access to public places, schools, and workplaces simply because of their race. A year later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, putting an end to racist voting laws that had prevented Black Americans from exercising their right to vote. It banned discriminatory practices like literacy tests and poll taxes, which had been used to keep Black citizens from the polls, particularly in the South. In 1968, another critical law was passed, the Fair Housing Act. This legislation made it illegal to discriminate in housing based on race, ensuring that Black families could not be denied homes, apartments, or loans simply because of their skin color. These laws transformed American society. Schools, buses, restaurants, and workplaces were no longer legally allowed to exclude Black citizens. The system was changing, but change came at a cost. Martin Luther King Jr.'s activism made him a target. He was arrested, attacked, spied on, and ultimately killed for demanding justice. Many others in the movement also faced violence and imprisonment. Even after these victories, racism didn't disappear. Racial discrimination still exists in housing, jobs, and education. Police brutality continues to spark national protests, like the Black Lives Matter movement. Voter suppression still affects minority communities. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was for true equality, not just legal changes. That dream is still being fought for today. More people of color hold leadership positions, including the election of Barack Obama as the first Black U.S. president in 2008. Martin Luther King Jr. once said,
"The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice."
But justice doesn't happen on its own. It takes people willing to stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right. Martin Luther King Jr. showed that one voice can change history, but it's up to all of us to finish what he started. Martin Luther King's dream inspired millions, but have we truly achieved it? What do you think? Do you believe Martin Luther King's dream has been fully realized? Or is there still more work to be done? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video meaningful, give it a like, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories from history. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.